Hello! This week was the yahrzeit of the Rambam, and I'm going to slant my Dvar Torah for this week in honour of the man who was probably the greatest Jewish and most influential general thinker from a Jewish perspective of the last 1,000 years. We now say for Shemos, the book of the Exodus, and Shemos the Parsha is an introduction to the national life of the Jewish people. They're enslaved. We've learnt about the birth of Moshe, and in the third chapter, Moshe is appointed to leadership. He encounters a burning bush, and he argues with God as to whether he should be appointed the leader. God thinks he's suitable, and Moshe disagrees. And eventually, in verse 13, Moshe says, "Vayomer Moshe Elohu Elokim," and Moshe said to God, "Hinei anochi bo el bnei Yisrael." So I'll come to bnei Yisrael, v'omarti lohem, and I'll say to them, Eloheinu seichem shlochani aleichem, the God of your ancestors sent me to you. And they'll go, yes, of course, we've heard that before. They're going to need some proof. V'omru li ma shemoi. They will say to me, what's his name? Now, it seems that they're asking, or he assumes they're going to ask, prove it. Tell us something about this God which would lead us to think that you know what you're talking about and you're the genuine article. Ma'oimar aleihem. What should I say to them? Vayomer Elokim el Moshe. And God responded to Moshe, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. He gives it a name which appears only once, just here. And that's often translated as, I am what I am, something along those lines. We'll come back to that. That's how you should identify me to Bnei Yisrael when they ask for you to prove your credentials. Vayomer, and Moshe said, Ko yisomar livnei Yisrael. He said, this is what you should say to Bnei Yisrael. God now says, that's who I am, but this is what you should say to Bnei Yisrael. Ehyeh shalochani aleichem. Ehyeh, that's the name again. I am, but without the other words, has sent me to you. So, the meaning of this name has been the subject of debate amongst the commentators. It's commonly translated, I am what I am, something along those lines, which means I'm self-justifying. I'm the God who self-justifies. You don't have to explain me in terms of anything else. Hirsch, in his translation, reads it as, I shall be that which I shall be or wish to be, and that captures the fact that the word ehyeh is actually in the future tense. Rashi offers a more prosaic explanation. Rashi, always the careful textual reader, is troubled by the discrepancy. What my name is Ehyeh asher ehyeh. But when you identify me to the people, just say Ehyeh. What about the rest of it? What about that asher ehyeh? What happened to that? So Rashi says the meaning of the name is I am with you in your current distress. They are in exile, they're enslaved, and I will be with you in future exiles. I will be with you through the vicissitudes of Jewish history, and that fits very well with the burning bush narrative, Hasne Enenu Kol, that the bush was not burnt up. It represents the totality of Jewish history, that no matter what will happen to us, the ups and downs of history, we will survive because God will be with us. That name fits. But then Moshe says, I need to make it worse for them. I need to tell them that beyond this slavery there will be more trouble. I'm just going to tell them the first bit. Ehyeh, that you'll be with them in this trouble, and we'll save the rest for another time. So Rashi's reading is geared to deal with the discrepancy between the two names. The question is, what does this name really mean? I'll return to Rav Hirsch in a moment, but I mentioned the Rambam, whose yahrzeit fell in the past few days. Now, the Rambam did not write a systematic commentary on the Torah, or if he did, we don't have it. We are reliant for his commentary on his commentary on verses of this sort on the commentary of his son Avraham, known as Avram ben Harambam, unsurprisingly. Here is a critical edition of that work. It only exists on Bereshis and Shemos, but fortunately we have it here. Says the Avram ben Harambam, Remez letimidius v'nitzchius she'eno achris. This indicates a continuity and eternity, this name, that has no end. The Inyan ha-kadmonios. Kadmonios means that God has always existed. Devuka boy, hatamidis la'osid, is connected with his continuity and his eternal existence. For the Rambam, this name means God always was, is, and always will be. And he discusses the way Saadia Gaon, who was one of perhaps the greatest pre-Maimonidean philosophers of the Jewish Arab world, he cites that with approval. And says Avram ben Rambam, and that is not significantly different from what my father, my teacher, said in explaining this awesome divine name. This means that God must exist. He is the only essential existent in the universe. Because necessary existence also encapsulates always having existed, continued existence, and eternity. And he explains that this is a very abbreviated form. It's so Maimonidean. The Rambam, in his Conversations in the Moreh Nevuchim, his Guide to the Perplexed, about God, how we understand God, and he has very, very strict parameters for the way it's permissible to describe or consider God, wonders whether it is indeed true that God always exists, and he certainly validates this view, but in this he differs from Aristotle, and he has conversations, as it were, with the philosophy and theology of Aristotle around the nature of God and God's, as it were, metzius, God's existence, his necessary existence and eternal existence. For the Rambam, defining God as the first cause, the always existent God, the necessary existent, underpins his entire philosophy. And it's unsurprising that he tries to squeeze it into this name here. But for the Rambam, he's saying, Moshe is told to say to the Jewish people, I am the God who precedes existence. Kadmon l'chol dovar asher nivro, as we say in Yigdal, which is a paraphrase of one of the Rambam's 13 principles. God preceded everything that he created, and he will also post-date it as well. So that fits very well with the Rambam's polemic in terms of medieval philosophy, his understanding of Aristotle, that this is how God presents himself. When you ask who is God, God is I always was, I always will be, and my existence is necessary. So that's in honour of the Rambam. But to finish, I was very taken with Rav Hirsch's explanation. Rav Hirsch, as I said, translates the name as I shall be that which I wish to be. And he makes the following observation. I'm going to read from a recent translation from the German. If I am to give an idea of myself, this is God speaking to Moshe, myself as in God, that will effect in the person who has understood it and become absorbed by it decisive change, raising him above and beyond all the other creatures and bringing him to direct intimate relationship to me. That Rav Hirsch understands is the purpose of knowing God's name. I'm elevated, I'm brought into a relationship with this God, then I will state my name and say of myself, I shall be what I will wish to be. And Hirsch explains, all other beings are what they have to be. Their existence is bound up with the will of the one who alone can say, I am, and also I shall be what I wish to be. This name expresses the personal, absolute and free nature of God, the ultimate freedom of God. This is a narrative about freedom, forthcoming freedom, talking to a nation of slaves who wish to be liberated, about the free God who will free them, a God who is free of any external constraints, very similar to the Maimonidean explanation. He stresses that the future is completely dependent on his will and he is free of any dependence. This name gives expression to the characteristic Jewish conception of God as an entirely new conception which is to be made known to mankind through Israel's deliverance from Egypt and which will eventually will bring about the redemption of the whole world. And finally, he says, Eyeh Asher Eyeh rises up against this delusion, the idea that man is not free. The denial of the freedom of God and of man tears it down and upholds the truth instead. God, who freely determines the future, and with him, free man, whose future in his own hands. It's a beautiful explanation. It's based on the Rambam, I think. And what he's saying is that Moshe is to announce to the Jewish people, this is a God who is free of all constraints, whose existence is necessary and therefore completely untied to anything else in existence, and as such has a free hand to free you and empower you with a God-given freedom to free ultimately yourselves and the whole of humanity. Good Shabbos and sei gesund und stark.